Okay, I think we're probably all here. So let me welcome everybody. I'm Eric Schwartz, I'm president of Refugees International. And it's my pleasure to welcome you as we mark and celebrate International Women's Day. It is also a real pleasure to welcome Senator Chris Van Hollen to this event, an event that coincides with the publication of a Refugees International report, Humanitarian Priorities, for the 117th Congress. And that document, I think, will be available in the chat or whatever functions we have. Senator Van Hollen began his elected political career as a member of the Maryland State Legislature, and in 2002 was elected to represent Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the House of Representatives. That's where I'm speaking to you from, where he served in the Democratic leadership. Senator Van Hollen was elected to the Senate in 2016. He now serves on the committees on appropriations, banking, housing and urban affairs, environment and public works, and the committee on the budget. He is also a national leader on both domestic and foreign policy issues and issues of international affairs. And he has played an extremely important and supportive and leading role in a range of international humanitarian and refugee policy issues over the years. I will be joined today, and it's a real pleasure to be joined by Lourena, who arrived in the United States as a resettled refugee from Liberia in 1992, and she now serves as chair of the Refugee Congress Board of Directors. Lourena has worked extensively in the immigration and refugee resettlement space as a volunteer, an intern, an advocate, and a leader. She currently serves as Associate Director of Student Services for the Year Up Philadelphia program, and she serves as a member of the Refugee Council Board of Directors. So, Senator Van Hollen, thank you so much for joining us. We are just delighted to have you. And I think I'll start with a very open-ended question, if I may. And that is, and it seems like an appropriate question in light of the 4 years that have preceded the current administration. By some estimates, the United States spends about $9 billion a year in international humanitarian and refugee assistance, broadly defined. Assistance that you have strongly and unequivocally supported. Why? What is the role, the value to US national interests of US engagement and leadership on these issues?
Well, Eric, first, if I can just say thank you to you and Refugees International for all your good work in this area, providing humanitarian assistance, working to lift the cap here on those seeking asylum. And for those of you who don't know, Eric and I have known each other for many years, and I'm always grateful for his leadership. I think it dates back to your days in the House of Representatives when you were also working with my wife, Catherine, on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Lourena.
It goes further. I was at the Carnegie Endowment when your dad was a senior associate.
That's true. Yes, indeed. So family goes way back. Thank you, Eric, for your leadership and that of your team. And Lourena, it's great to be with you and with everybody on International Women's Day. And this is a fundamental question, and it is really important that we answer it for the American people. I do believe that as a strong country, a wealthy country, and as a global leader, we do have a moral humanitarian responsibility to respond to those around the world who are in desperate need. And we've had, as part of our founding, a values-based sort of foreign policy, but our interests do go beyond that. And I think this is an important investment from our country for two reasons. One, I do think as people look around the world for those who are leaders in responding to the needs of those who are most at risk, they appreciate, the publics in these countries appreciate those who are stepping up in the role of the United States. And I just want to share with everybody a very short anecdote. Some of you may know, Eric does, but I come from a foreign service family. My father was in the foreign service, lived many of my early years overseas. And I remember distinctly when we were in Sri Lanka, visiting a very remote village and going into the hut of the leader of the village. It was a village where the Peace Corps had been, and they'd been digging wells and improving sanitation. And on the wall of the hut, and this was hung a picture, a portrait of President John F. Kennedy, of course, who launched the Peace Corps. He launched it in the 1960s. This was in the mid 1970s. And if you go to that village today, you'll still find people who remember the important role that the Peace Corps played. Now, the Peace Corps, of course, is one aspect of our foreign policy, but it goes to the larger point that people do remember those who help in hours of need. And finally, the third reason is we do have an interest in promoting stability around the world. And to the extent that we can be involved in first preventing mass migration in the first place by dealing with political instability or dealing with climate change, obviously we reduce the risks of having to engage for other reasons in these areas. So stability is important. Investing in goodwill is important, and doing the right thing from a moral point of view, I think is important for a country like the United States of America. And that's a very small investment compared to the investment we make in our military, which is also an important investment. But what we spend in this area dwarfs, is small compared to the other investment, and yet reaps important dividends for people who are helped as well as for the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Why don't we turn to Lourena, who I think may have a question about the refugee resettlement process.
Good evening, Senator. It's such a pleasure to be with you today to have this conversation. Thank you so much for the warm introduction earlier, Eric. Refugee Congress is thrilled to be a core partner of the Refugee Advocacy Lab, and we love working with Refugees International. And we are also proud to be joining a community of advocates that are committed to uplifting and amplifying refugee voices. Refugee Congress is a nonpartisan national advocacy organization built and led by former refugees, asylum seekers, and other vulnerable migrants to promote the well-being, integration, and dignity of all vulnerable migrants. I worked in the resettlement space between 2017 and 2018 at the Jewish Family Services of Delaware, which is the only refugee resettlement agency in Delaware. I cannot say enough how much I enjoyed seeing the smiles of families who spent years on refugee camps arrive at the doorsteps of our office. Aside from assisting families during their reception and placement period, which is their first 90 days of arrival, I also trained volunteers who were community members about the refugee crisis and ways in which they could partner with us to help arriving families and also help create awareness on the issue. In 2017, there were 65 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, of which about 20 million were refugees. By the time I transitioned, the number had increased to 68 million forcibly displaced people. Today, UNHCR estimates that the number of forcibly displaced people have surpassed 80 million, of which 26.3 million are refugees as of mid-2020. Senator, I would like to remind you and members of Congress that America has always been a champion in refugee resettlement. Sadly, in the last few years, we lost that title. As a humanitarian leader, America is uniquely positioned to make an impact that other nations will follow. So today, I'm honored to be joining you and Refugees International for this important conversation on the humanitarian priorities for the 117th Congress. Senator, you consistently pushed back against the former administration's extraordinary cuts in the refugee admissions program. How do you assess the new team's efforts on refugee admissions thus far? Let me add that there is a concern in the community that the new PD hasn't been signed, so people are being held up. More broadly, what political challenges do you think the administration will confront in the effort to get to 125,000? And how can members of Congress and civil society be helpful?
Well, first, let me thank you and the Congress for the Refugee Congress for all that you do to protect vulnerable individuals around the world. And as you say, what a difference an election makes. It's not a partisan statement to simply cite the facts that we had a previous administration that, of course, went out of its way to slam the door on refugees to the United States, reducing the annual admission level to as low as 15,000. Whereas with President Biden and Vice President Harris, very early on, they announced that they would raise that level for this fiscal year to 125,000. At the same time, I should say they also took other important actions like effectively re-engaging with the World Health Organization, re-entering the Paris Climate Accords, and getting rid of the Muslim ban. All very important measures taken. With respect to lifting this cap and setting the new target of 125,000, the good news is the administration has the authority to do that. And while there'll be continuing opposition from some ranks in the Congress, I'm confident that we will be able to work with them to get it done and provide the necessary resources. I will say that during the last 4 years, despite the fact that the Trump administration sought to cut the foreign assistance budgets by over 40%, Congress was able, on a bipartisan basis, to push back and prevent those very deep cuts in international health programs and humanitarian assistance. With respect to the refugee admission cap, of course, that is more within the control of the executive branch. And that's why I'm confident this administration will move forward. Now, I understand the concern that they've not actually issued the presidential order here. I look forward to working with you to expedite that process. But I don't see that as any diminishment of the commitment that they've made here. I think they're committed to moving forward. And I look forward to working with everybody on this call to, putting that in place as quickly as possible, because I understand the concern and the fact that some people have, had planned to come and have been stopped literally as they're leaving. So look forward to working with you, but we will get this done.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. And before I go to the next question we have, I think if I can speak frankly, these issues are very interesting in the advocacy community, because there's no question that the individuals in senior positions in the new administration have come into those positions on migration issues with very strong policy perspectives that are consistent with those of the refugee advocacy and humanitarian advocacy community. So I think the community now is confronting this fundamental question of how to engage, where to enable, where you can play a role as enabling progress versus where you need to think about, being critical, and whether that criticism should be private, whether that criticism should be public, not because of political concerns, but because of the concerns about how best to affect the outcomes that the community, members of the community have sought. And I think this issue is the first example that we're confronting. So let me ask another question, if I may. Some have suggested that South Asia, a region that you, of course, know so very well, could have tens of millions of persons displaced by climate-induced disaster over the next decade or so. Last month, President Biden issued really a very significant executive order on refugee admissions that had a piece on climate and migration. And among other taskings, he directed the National Security Advisor to report back in 6 months on displacement caused by climate change, on options for building resilience, and perhaps most significantly on options regarding resettlement of climate-affected migrants and procedures, recommendations on procedures for recognition of such persons. So I guess my question is, what should the National Security Advisor be recommending in this report that's due in about 6 months?
Well, let me first, Eric, with respect to the best way to engage this administration in terms of implementation of what I think are their good intentions with respect to these issues, I think it's all of the above. I think we need to communicate privately, but also, express our concerns publicly, and then, but in a way that's pushing them in the right direction, and see how things develop. And thank you for focusing on this intersection of climate change and issues of displacement and refugees, because we're already seeing it in many parts of the world. And as you say, we're going to see it in even greater numbers if we don't, number one, address climate change, but also be prepared on the resiliency side. So look, I think that it was really important that when President Biden came in, he said we're going to take an all-of-government response to climate change, and really, as this directive to the National Security Council indicates, also take a global view of what it means for the United States and for the world. I think that as we saw, I think it was the World Bank just a few years ago issued a report saying that if we don't address climate change on an urgent basis, we could see up to 40 million, climate people displaced by climate in South Asia alone, with Bangladesh, of course, being the sort of round zero for the impact. And so we need to do, it seems to me, 3 things that need to be spelled out. Number one, we obviously have to do everything in our power to slow down and then stop and reverse climate change. And it is important that we rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. Even more importantly is that we meet the goals for reduction. And that is why, as part of what I think is going to be the next major piece of legislation, we consider the infrastructure modernization bill. There'll be a major focus on investment in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and working with our global partners to do it. So we've got to do that. We also need to follow up with our obligations and step up our commitment to the Green Climate Fund. I think we all know that the previous administration reneged on the United States' commitment to help other countries under the Paris Agreement Accords to make those investments to help countries, take measures to address and then prepare for more resiliency. And then importantly, the Congress did establish, beef up the Development Fund account. This is the successor to OPIC here. And we do think that that's an important tool in the Investment Development Account to encourage and provide the opportunities for other countries to invest in green energy and clean technologies. And then finally, we need to make sure that we address the piece of it that we're talking about here today, which is, try to avoid, again, the goal is to try to avoid these huge displacements by addressing climate change and dealing with resiliency. But also we need to be prepared for the fact that even under the best case scenarios right now, we could experience large displacements, and we need to be leaders in the world in preparing for how we're going to deal with that.
Thank you. I think we have time, and I think we need to treat this session as sort of an appetizer for 4 more years to come of interaction, because of the role that the Center has played in so many critical humanitarian issues. But I think we probably have time for about 1 more question. So Lourena, let me turn to you, and then we'll see where we are. Lourena?
Sure. Thank you. Senator, in looking at global issues, today is International Women's Day. Refugees International and others have reported on how the COVID-19 global pandemic has exacerbated vulnerabilities for women and girls. What more can Congress do to expand support for essential protection programming along with healthcare and livelihoods?
Well, you're right to really shine the spotlight on this issue, because even before COVID-19, we had the urgent need to address some of these issues that are impacting women and girls, including violence against women and girls. And as you indicated, we've seen some horrifying increases in that during this COVID-19 epidemic. So I think it's really important. And again, I'm glad we have a new administration that I think will be willing to apply more resources and target more resources in this important area. We did as part of, in December, we were finally able on a bipartisan basis to provide about $4 billion for the United States to reengage with Gavi and the vaccines. In this most recent legislation, though, there's about $12 billion to address different international impacts and humanitarian impacts from COVID-19. And so those funds will be able to flow, I think, to a number of important agencies to address these issues. Now, we also have legislation, and I know that Refugees International has a series of bills that I hope the Congress can take up and pass, including the Keeping Women and Girls Safe from the Start Act, a very important legislative initiative, and the Global HER Act, which would permanently repeal the global gag rule to make sure that women and girls get access to the full range of healthcare advice and treatment and care that they need. So these are a number of key areas, and of course, funds for the maternal and child health care programs is also vital. Welcome any additional ideas, either now or in follow-up, to what we can be doing to better target these resources and address all aspects of this, but especially, as you said, the increase in violence against women, which we're seeing here in the United States and around the world.
Thank you. Before this event, and thank you, Lourena, before this event, our team put together, I asked, let's get a list of the issues on which Senator Van Hollen has played a leading role on concerns that we have. And what I'd like to propose, we have 4 minutes left, is I will list about 5 or 6 of those suggestions, none of which we've had the chance to discuss, all of which, Senator, you've taken measures to really support the objectives of the refugee inclusion, refugee support, humanitarian assistance, and protection of human rights. So whether it was funding for the migration and refugee assistance accounts, your work on temporary protected status and new legislation on TPS, your overall support of the Appropriations Committee for generous humanitarian assistance funding, your work on the COVAX facility, and your position on assistance to Palestinians through the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. So we have 3 minutes left, and I want to invite you to take on any, all, or none of those issues and offer us some closing comments.
Well, Eric, Thank you for mentioning those, and thank you for what you and Refugees, International has been doing on all these fronts. Let me just say here at home, it is one of my goals to really address the TPS program, and also expand TPS to cover some of the areas that are really in need right now, including Venezuela, including Cameroon, and some other African countries, a number of other places I think we're all familiar with. And the bill that I've introduced, called the Secure Act, would provide some sense of certainty and permanence to many individuals who've come to the United States under TPS, sometimes as many as 20 years ago from El Salvador, for example, and provide a path toward permanent residence and beyond. So that's a big piece that we need to address. With respect to Palestinian refugees, another area where the Trump administration just slashed U.S. assistance was both our bilateral support for agencies that support Palestinian humanitarian relief, as well as UNRWA. And it's going to be very important that we push the Biden administration to re-engage on both those fronts. And again, they've said very positive things, but this is an area where we also need to make sure we push hard for follow through on funding UNRWA. And there's $75 million available right now for humanitarian assistance for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And then on the worldwide issue of COVAX, I'm glad that the Biden administration engaged with COVAX and provided funding after the previous administration had left it. But we do need to be very engaged in this effort. And finally, and this is more recent news, I am pleased to have recently joined the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I will be chairing the subcommittee on Africa. And that, of course, involves all the issues that bring us together today. Everything from humanitarian assistance to issues of climate change to issues involving women and girls. So, and of course, refugee and migration and displacement. So in South Sudan, and of course, we have a terrible situation now in Ethiopia, in the Tigray area. So these are all issues that you're all very engaged in. And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you as we turn the page and close the book on the last 4 years, and really open a new chapter, which I think brings with it lots of opportunities. But as you have said, and Lourena have said, it's important now that we work together to make sure that we follow through on these commitments.
Before I close, Lourena, is there anything that you'd like to say before we close the Zoom link?
Sure. I just want to say thank you, Senator. And I also, along with Refugee Congress and Refugees International, look forward to working with you on these issues. And I'm excited to hear that you'll be chairing the Committee on Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And one of the things we've seen in the last 4 years is really a decimation of a lot of the infrastructure we have here to help with refugee resettlement. We're in my state of Maryland, we've got a lot of great organizations that have been involved in that, but because of the dramatic cutbacks, they've obviously lost some of their capacity, which we all need to work together to rebuild for resettlement.
Well, I want to first thank Lourena Gboeah and for her participation, but also for the role of the Refugee Congress, which is playing a singular important role in the discussion of these critical humanitarian issues, a voice that is so crucial. And so Lourena, thank you for not only joining us, but for everything that the Refugee Congress does. Chris, Senator Van Hollen, we can't thank you enough for taking the time, but also for your steadfast commitment to these issues. And you will be hearing from many of our organizations over the next 4 years as we try to seize opportunities that seem to be available in the immediate and in the longer term future. So thank you so much. And we will close only 2 minutes behind schedule. Take care.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all. Thanks. Bye-bye.